On their first night, she took charge, leaving the cowboy who wanted a virgin bride frozen in surprise. Red Mesa was not a planet for the faint-hearted. Its red dust stretched over endless plains dotted with jagged rock formations that glowed under the twin suns. The air was dry, harsh, and carried the scent of iron, and the settlers had long grown tough against it. At the center of this unforgiving land lay the Callahan Ranch, one of the largest holdings on the planet, owned by Jace Callahan, a cowboy whose reputation was as rugged as the terrain he rode through. Jace had never been a man to show weakness, and his ranch had thrived under his careful but relentless hands. Livestock grazed in enclosed plains, water channels ran efficiently across the dry land, and the few settlers who worked for him respected his authority. Yet a new challenge was about to arrive, one he had not expected. A transport shuttle descended from the sky, kicking up red dust in thick clouds. The settlers had gathered to watch its arrival, some curious, some judgmental. Inside the shuttle was Elara Quinn, the woman Jace had married only weeks ago through arrangements common in Red Mesa's colony settlements. She was not what the gossiping settlers had hoped for. She looked calm, composed, and quiet, but rumors had already spread faster than the shuttle could land. Elara had been labeled a lazy bride, a humiliating title meant to strike at Jace through her. The shuttle doors hissed open, and Elara stepped down, her boots sinking slightly into the soft red dust. She adjusted her wide-brimmed hat, letting her eyes sweep across the ranch. The sunlight glinted off the faint metal accents of her dress, practical yet subtly elegant, a combination designed for mobility and work. A murmur ran through the crowd. "Look at her," whispered one worker. "She can't last a week here." "She'll ruin the ranch," said another louder. Jace's jaw tightened. He ignored them, keeping his gaze on Elara. He had chosen her not for appearance, but for something deeper, though the settlers had not seen that yet. "Welcome to Red Mesa, Mrs. Callahan," Jace said, his voice steady but carrying the weight of authority. "This is your home now." Elara nodded politely, her eyes never leaving the ranch. "Thank you, Jace. I've heard a lot. But I'm ready to learn." Her voice was soft, but there was a firmness beneath it, a quiet assurance.
The settlers snickered.
"Learn? Ha! More like sit in the shade while the men do all the work." Jace felt a flicker of anger but held it back. He would not let them see him falter. "Ignore them," he said quietly to Elara. "They talk because they are afraid of change." Elara only smiled faintly and adjusted the straps of the small bag she carried. She walked toward the ranch house with measured steps, taking in every detail: the water tanks, the livestock pens, the solar panels mounted on the rooftops. To an outsider, she may have seemed silent, but her mind was racing, calculating, analyzing, and already forming a plan in her head. The first night at the ranch was tense. Settlers continued their whispers and jokes, questioning Jace's judgment in marrying her. Dinner was quiet. Jace watched her closely as she ate, noticing how carefully she observed everything around her. She didn't rush her food, didn't speak much, but her eyes betrayed a sharp intelligence, one that Jace had already begun to admire. After dinner, Jace led her to the main house balcony overlooking the plains. "Tomorrow you'll see why this ranch is tough," he said. "It's not easy work. Water is scarce, livestock are tricky, and the storms, well, they don't forgive mistakes." "I understand," Elara said, her eyes scanning the horizon where the twin suns were setting behind jagged rock formations. "I've worked in harsh conditions before. I can adapt." Jace raised an eyebrow. "Adapta. We'll see." The next morning brought the first taste of Red Mesa's challenge. The twin suns rose quickly, scorching the plains and already drying the sparse water channels. Elara followed Jace as he inspected the livestock pens, watching him handle the cattle with precision and strength. The settlers, eager to judge, whispered again. "See? She's barely moving. She'll ruin the morning rounds." Elara did not respond. Instead, she observed, she took note of the water distribution, the wear on the pens, and the condition of the livestock. By noon, while the settlers grew tired under the harsh sun, she quietly began making small adjustments. She tightened loose panels, repositioned buckets to collect water more efficiently, and even calmed the nervous calf that had slipped through a broken gate.
A few settlers noticed and scoffed. "What is she doing?"
Waste of energy. But Jace's sharp eyes did not miss it. He watched as her hands moved with a confidence that belied the rumors. There was a rhythm to her movements, almost scientific, as if she knew precisely what the ranch needed. By the evening, the work of one day had been transformed subtly but effectively. Water collection improved, livestock were calmer, and the small adjustments had already begun making a difference. Alara returned to the house, dusty and tired, but her expression was calm, almost satisfied. That night a gathering was held by the settlers. Rumors and whispers escalated into outright mockery. They laughed, sharing stories of lazy brides from other settlements and comparing her to them. Jace listened quietly, his patience tested, but he refused to intervene yet. He wanted Alara to show them for herself. Alara, meanwhile, did not respond to the ridicule. She quietly planned the next day's work in her mind, thinking about how she could improve the water efficiency and care for the livestock with minimal effort but maximum impact. She was determined to prove that strength was not always loud and visible. Sometimes it was clever, quiet, and patient. The first week passed with small victories. The settlers began noticing subtle improvements in the ranch, though they refused to admit it openly. Jace saw them. He saw the respect forming slowly in the eyes of the workers who had mocked her before, but it was not the recognition that mattered to him. What mattered was that Alara had the intelligence, patience, and determination to thrive in this harsh world. One evening, as the twin suns dipped below the horizon and the sky turned a soft orange, Jace found her standing alone on the balcony, surveying the ranch. "You're different from what they expected," he said, breaking the silence. Alara turned to him, a faint smile on her lips. "I know, and I don't intend to disappoint you, or this land." Jace nodded slowly. For the first time in his life, he felt both relief and admiration. He had chosen her for reasons the settlers would never understand. She was quiet, strong, and clever. Everything he needed to survive the challenges of Red Mesa, and maybe even something more. The settlers may have labeled her a lazy bride, but Jace knew the truth. This woman had a fire inside her, a determination that would not be quenched by gossip, mockery, or harsh suns. And as the night settled over the Red Plains, he realized that together they could face whatever Red Mesa threw at them. The storm, the ridicule, the challenges, none of it mattered. Alara was here, and she was ready. The morning sun rose slowly over Red Mesa, casting long shadows across the ranch. The twin suns made the plains shine like copper, and the dry wind carried the faint scent of dust and iron. For Jace Callahan, mornings were never easy. Livestock needed care, water tanks had to be monitored, and the harsh terrain demanded constant attention. But today, he watched his new bride, Alara Quinn, with a different perspective. Alara had already begun her daily routine before the workers even stirred. Her hands moved quickly but carefully, checking water channels for leaks, inspecting fences, and observing the livestock. Every step was deliberate, yet it had a rhythm that seemed natural. The settlers gathered, their whispers audible even across the wide ranch. "She looks tired already," one said. "She's barely doing anything," another scoffed. Jace didn't respond. He had learned by now that it was better to watch than to argue. Words from gossiping settlers rarely changed anything, but actions always spoke louder. And Alara's actions were beginning to show. By midday, the heat was intense. Red Mesa's sun did not forgive weakness. Workers struggled to keep up with the chores, carrying buckets of water and moving livestock between grazing areas. Alara moved among them quietly, guiding the placement of water troughs, adjusting the direction of the windbreaks, and even helping a young calf that had slipped into a dry ditch. One of the settlers, a burly man named Hank, shook his head. "This is ridiculous. The woman is barely trying." Jace finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "She knows what she's doing, Hank. Watch and learn." Hank scoffed but said nothing. Alara, meanwhile, focused on a small section of the ranch that had been causing trouble. A water channel that was slowly leaking and wasting precious liquid. With her hands, she adjusted the flow, using small pieces of scrap metal and wooden beams to reinforce the walls. It wasn't fancy, but it worked. Water began to flow efficiently, filling the troughs without spilling onto the red soil. A few of the younger workers, curious despite themselves, began to follow her methods. They noticed how quickly the livestock responded when she approached, calm and unafraid. Even the grumpy old horse, a stubborn animal named Brimstone, allowed her to ride him briefly to inspect the fences. By afternoon, the settlers' whispers had changed from ridicule to confusion. She's actually doing something," muttered one. "Don't get used to it," said another, though his voice lacked conviction. Jace, observing from the barn, allowed himself a small smile. Alara's work was quiet, almost invisible, but the results were undeniable. The ranch was slowly becoming more efficient under her hands, and she had done it without demanding recognition. Later that day, a complication arose. A small herd of livestock had wandered toward a steep cliff on the edge of the property. The settlers panicked, unsure how to handle the situation. Jace rode out immediately, shouting commands. Alara followed, her movements precise and deliberate. Instead of rushing or panicking, she assessed the terrain, noting safe paths and obstacles. Using calm gestures in her voice, she guided the livestock back towards safety, avoiding panic among the animals.
Hank, the skeptic, watched in disbelief. How did she do that? He muttered.
She's good, Jay said quietly. Really good. The incident with the livestock marked a turning point. Settlers who had been mocking Alara now looked at her with curiosity, though most were too proud to admit it. She didn't seek approval. Her focus was the ranch, and the success of the animals and water systems mattered more than anyone's opinion. As evening approached, a new challenge arose. Red Mesa's weather was unpredictable, and today a sudden dust storm began to form on the horizon. The settlers panicked again, worried about livestock, water tanks, and the delicate solar panels that powered parts of the ranch. Jace mounted Brimstone, ready to inspect the damage. Alara followed, her mind already calculating the best approach. When the storm hit, wind tearing across the plains and carrying clouds of red dust, she took charge calmly. She organized the ranch hands to secure water tanks, move vulnerable animals to protected areas, and shield equipment from damage. The storm lasted for hours, fierce and relentless. Many workers feared the worst, but Alara's instructions kept them focused and safe. She even climbed atop the main barn to secure a panel that threatened to fly off, her hands steady despite the wind. When the storm finally passed, the ranch was largely intact. A few minor damages occurred, but nothing catastrophic. The settlers were speechless. The woman they had labeled lazy had guided them through one of Red Mesa's harshest storms with intelligence and courage. Jace rode up to her, his clothes coated in red dust. "You've done more today than most people here have done in a month," he said, his voice carrying pride. Alara smiled faintly, brushing dust from her sleeves. "It's just work. It has to be done." The settlers still struggled with their pride, unwilling to praise her openly. But murmurs of respect began to spread quietly among them. "Maybe she isn't lazy after all," one said softly. Night fell over Red Mesa, and the twin suns disappeared beyond the horizon, leaving the red plains bathed in shadow. Inside the main house, Jace and Alara sat quietly, sharing a simple meal. The room smelled of cooked beans and roasted vegetables, and the faint glow of solar-powered lamps lit their faces. Jace finally spoke, his tone thoughtful. "You're different from what I expected, Alara. Stronger and smarter." Alara looked at him, her expression calm but serious. "I need to prove myself, not to them, but to this land, to the ranch. If it survives, then I succeed." Jace nodded, understanding. "You don't need their approval. I already know what you're capable of." Despite the exhaustion of the day, Alara felt a quiet satisfaction. She had faced ridicule, labor, and a storm, and she had overcome it all with her hands and mind. The settlers' judgment no longer mattered. What mattered was that she was making a real difference, quietly and effectively. Over the next few days, the pattern continued. Settlers watched as she improved the efficiency of water channels, repaired fences, and managed livestock. Each small success challenged their preconceived notions. While most remained silent, a few younger workers began to ask questions, curious about her methods. Jace observed her silently. There was a rhythm to her work that he had never seen before, a combination of intelligence, patience, and determination. She didn't need to shout or demand attention. Her actions spoke louder than any words could. By the end of the second week, the ranch had begun to show subtle but important improvements. Water loss had decreased, livestock were calmer and healthier, and the settlers, though hesitant, began to acknowledge that the lazy bride label was false. One evening, as the red sky darkened and stars appeared above Red Mesa, Jace and Alara stood together on the balcony. The twin suns were gone, leaving a quiet, cold night in their place. "They still talk," Jace said softly, "but I can see they're starting to notice." Alara nodded. "Let them talk. Words can't harm the ranch. Only actions matter here." Jace looked at her, admiration growing. She was not only proving herself to the settlers, but also transforming the ranch in ways he had not imagined. She was clever, patient, and strong. Not in the obvious ways, but in ways that truly mattered. The night was calm, but Red Mesa always held challenges. Jace knew there would be more storms, more hardships, and more skeptics. But for the first time, he felt confident that Alara could face them all, and maybe even guide him through them. As the stars shone over the red plains, the settlers' whispers faded into the background. Alara had begun to carve her place on the ranch, and no rumor or insult could undo what she was building with her bare hands. She was no longer a lazy bride. She was a force to be reckoned with. Quiet, clever, and unstoppable life on Red Mesa never stayed calm for long. Just when the Callahan Ranch began to show real improvement, new problems rose from the dry red soil. The water channels flowed better, the livestock were healthier, and the workers moved with more confidence. These changes did not go unnoticed. Across the plains, at a neighboring ranch, a man named Silas Crow watched with sharp eyes. Silas owned land close to Jace Callahan's property. He had always wanted to expand, and the Callahan Ranch stood in his way. When rumors reached him that Jace's ranch was improving under the guidance of a woman everyone once mocked, Silas felt both anger and disbelief. A lazy bride fixing a ranch? Silas scoffed. That doesn't happen by chance. Silas believed success should belong only to the strong and loud, not to quiet people working in the background. To him, Elara Quinn was a threat, not because of her strength, but because she changed the balance of power on Red Mesa. Back at the Callahan Ranch, the settlers were beginning to change. Some still held on to their pride, but others openly respected Elara now. A few workers even waited for her instructions before starting their tasks. She never demanded control. She simply worked, explained when asked, and let results speak for themselves. One morning, a group of younger ranch hands gathered near the water tanks. "Mrs. Callahan," one of them said, unsure but respectful, "can you show us how you fix the water flow?" Elara nodded. "Of course. It's not difficult. You just need to watch how the land moves." Jace stood nearby, listening quietly. This was new. People were no longer mocking her. They were learning from her. However, not everyone welcomed this change. Hank, the burly worker who once doubted her, struggled with his pride. "She's taking over," he muttered. "This is still a cowboy's ranch." Jace turned to him calmly. "It's a working ranch, and it's better now than it was before." Hank said nothing more, but his silence spoke of inner conflict. A few days later, trouble arrived. A supply shipment meant for the Callahan Ranch was delayed without explanation. Tools, spare parts, and water filters failed to arrive on time. The workers grew uneasy. Without those supplies, maintaining the ranch would become difficult. Elara noticed the tension immediately. "This isn't an accident," she said to Jace. Jace nodded. "I was thinking the same." Silas Crow controls the supply routes nearby. Instead of reacting with anger, Elara suggested preparation. "We should assume things will get harder. Let's strengthen what we already have." Under her guidance, the ranch began storing water more carefully, repairing older tools, and using resources wisely. She even repurposed broken equipment into useful tools. The workers were surprised by how much could be done with so little. Meanwhile, Silas Crow made his move. One night, a section of fencing near the border was damaged. Livestock wandered dangerously close to Silas's land. He claimed the animals had crossed into his territory and demanded compensation. The settlers were angry and ready to argue. Jace prepared to ride out and confront Silas. Elara stopped him. "Let me handle this," she said calmly. Jace hesitated but trusted her. "All right, I'll be with you." They rode together across the plains to Silas's ranch. The land grew rougher as they approached, with tall rocks and deep shadows. Silas greeted them with a forced smile. "Well, if it isn't the famous cowboy and his so-called miracle bride," Silas said mockingly. Elara met his gaze without fear. "Your fence was damaged on our side." "We have proof. The livestock never crossed into your land." Silas laughed. "Proof? From a woman who plays rancher?" Elara calmly activated a small handheld device. It projected a simple map showing movement patterns from livestock trackers, standard tools she had quietly installed earlier. The data clearly showed the animals never crossed the border. Silas's smile faded. He hadn't expected this. Jace spoke firmly. "We'll repair the fence ourselves, but there will be no compensation." Silas had no choice but to agree. He watched them leave, his anger burning hotter than before. Back at the ranch, word spread quickly. The settlers were amazed. Elara had outsmarted Silas without raising her voice or starting a fight. Even Hank finally approached her that evening. "I was wrong," he said stiffly. "You saved us trouble." Elara nodded politely. "We all want the same thing, a strong ranch." That night, the settlers gathered near the main barn. For the first time, Elara was not the subject of jokes, but of quiet praise. Some spoke openly, others only nodded in respect. Jace stood beside her, feeling something he had not felt in years: partnership. He was no longer carrying the burden of the ranch alone. Yet Red Mesa was not done testing them. A rare energy storm was detected by the colony's sensors.
Unlike dust storms, energy storms could disrupt power systems and damage equipment. The settlers panicked again. Solar panels could fail. Water pumps could shut down.
Alara stepped forward.
We have time, but we must act now. She organized the workers efficiently, dividing tasks clearly. Some secured panels, others protected the water systems. Jace handled the livestock, guiding them to safe zones. When the storm hit, the sky glowed with strange lights, and the air hummed with energy. The ranch shook, but it held. Thanks to Alara's planning, damage was minimal. As the storm passed, the settlers looked around in disbelief. The ranch still stood strong. One worker whispered, "She saved us again." Jace turned to Alara, pride clear in his eyes. "They see you now." Alara looked over the land she had worked so hard to protect. "I didn't do this for recognition," she said softly. "But I won't stop either." Silas Crow watched from afar as news spread across Red Mesa. The Callahan Ranch was thriving, and the woman he underestimated was becoming a symbol of change. He knew one thing for sure. This was not over yet. As night fell, the settlers lit lanterns across the ranch. Laughter and calm voices replaced whispers and doubt. Alara stood beside Jace, the red plains stretching endlessly before them. The ranch was stronger now, not just in land and livestock, but in unity. The woman once called a lazy bride had earned her place. And Red Mesa would remember her name. The red plains of Red Mesa were quiet, but the silence did not feel peaceful. It felt heavy, as if the land itself was waiting. The Callahan Ranch stood stronger than ever, yet Jace Callahan knew one truth very well: success always attracted danger. Silas Crow had not given up. From his ranch across the border, Silas watched the Callahan land grow greener and more organized. Water channels shined under the sun, livestock moved calmly, and workers followed clear systems. It was no longer just a cowboy's ranch. It was something new, something smarter, and Silas hated it. "They think they've won," he said to his men. "That woman thinks she owns the land now." Silas planned carefully. He knew force would not work. Jace was strong, and the settlers now stood together. So Silas chose another path: control. One morning the colony council sent a notice. A land reassessment would take place. Old borders would be reviewed, claims could be challenged. The message was clear. Silas was coming for the Callahan Ranch. When Jace read the notice, his face hardened. This is his final move. Alara read it calmly, then folded the paper. "Then we meet it prepared." The settlers gathered in the main barn. Fear filled the room. If the land was taken, everything they built would be lost. Alara stepped forward. "This ranch survives because we built it together, we followed the rules, we improved the land. That matters." "But Silas has influence," someone said. Alara nodded. "Then we show proof." Not anger. Proof. Over the next days, the ranch became a center of focused activity. Alara gathered data: water efficiency records, livestock health logs, soil improvement results, and energy output reports. Everything was documented. Jace watched in quiet respect. "You planned for this." "I planned for survival," Alara replied. When the council arrived, they expected arguments and chaos. Instead, they found order. Alara presented everything clearly. She spoke calmly, explaining how the land had been restored, how resources were protected, and how workers benefited. Jace spoke little, letting the work speak for itself. Then Silas stepped forward. "This land was wasted before," he argued. "Callahan got lucky." He doesn't deserve it." Alara looked at him steadily. "Luck doesn't last this long." The council reviewed everything. Hours passed. At sunset, the decision was made. The Callahan Ranch kept its land. Silas Crow lost his claim. Silas left without a word, his power finally broken. That night, the ranch was filled with quiet celebration. Not loud cheers, but deep relief. Lanterns glowed, food was shared. Workers laughed freely. Hank raised his cup. "To Mrs. Callahan." Others followed. Alara felt something shift.